You see, children, when you're taken away from your home and you have no land, not even a name and no culture, you becomes nobody, a slave. And that's what the slave master wanted us to forget. All the things that made us in the image of God, because we were godly people. We believe in righteousness, and was no righteousness in that land. Oh, they beat our men until they were no more. But there was no protection. Because remember that your man is your protection. And without the man, then you are open prey to everyone.
Those were some rough days, my children. Yeah, be glad that you wasn't there. I lived through those days. I was in the state of Mississippi. It was very hard and very cruel. And I witnessed a many hard day there. Everybody waits. From 5 years on until you were no more. There was nothing to help you. You lived to get an old, ripe old life, but you wait all the way through. My mother used to come, wake from sun up to sundown and come home and cook and iron and get the children ready so that you could go back to the field the next day. And they didn't want you to know nothing about your past, your future, nothing. They want to keep you within the darkness in a certain kind of way that you would never be able to discover yourself from whence you came or why you were going and nothing. I'll never forget old Uncle John, who runned away and brought back. And they called he was so rebellious, and the best thing it was to get rid of him, to keep him from spoiling the other slave. So they hung him.
Years after the disobedience and breaking of the law by the Israelites and their migrations from Jerusalem into Western Africa and from Iberia into Western Africa, the curses outlined within Deuteronomy followed them and cleaved unto them generation through generation. We see, as the Lord outlined for us in Deuteronomy 28:68, we met our faith and were led away captive into Egypt again, but this time by way of ships. Continued on within Luke 21 and verse 24, Christ told us during his time upon the earth that we will be led away captive into all nations. Furthermore, defining our captivity. In the book Judea Trembles Under Rome by Rudolph R. Windsor, he outlines something very important. It reads, "The Israelites bore the iniquities of the nations by suffering from slavery, persecution, and oppression, as the African Hebrews suffered in America." Furthermore, we can take it to another book known as The History, Civil, and Commercials of the British West Indies, written by Brian Edwards. It reads, Friday, December 16th, 3 Guinea ships began in the harbor full of slaves from Africa. I testified a wish to visit the ships previous to the sale. I would have visited them privately and unexpectedly, but it was not practical. Everything was prepared for our visit, as the least observant eye might have discovered. In particular, I was disgusted with a general jumping or dancing of the Negroes on the deck, which some, and perhaps many of them, did voluntarily, but some under the force or control. For I saw a sailor, or more than once, catch those rudely by the arm who had ceased dancing, and by gesture menace them to repeat their motion, to clap their hands and shout their song of Yah, Yah, which I understood to mean friends. but what we understood and what our ancestors understood to mean the God of Israel.
For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion.
Gihunge, Temiba, Mayanye War. No,
Ezekiel chapter 39 verses 23 to 24. And the heathen shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they trespassed against me. Therefore hid I my face from them, and gave them into the hand of their enemies. So fell they all by the sword. According to their uncleanness and according to their transgressions have I done unto them, and hid my face from them. Key things to take from this. The Most High said that the heathen shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity. All right, this is why we see the participation of all the heathen nations in the downfall of Israel, known as the so-called Negro of today. This is why they all participated in the slave trade. This is why they all participate in our downfall to this day. Second thing is, the Most High said he was going to hide his face from us. All right, so throughout this captivity, throughout this scattering, we were going to have to endure these curses all the way through until it's time to be redeemed. Taking a look at the book, The Seven Feasts of Israel and the Messiah by Ronald Jean. It tells us that although the Africans saw Israel, or the Israelites, as African neighbors, the white European Christians, European proselyte Jews, and Islam knew that they were the children of Israel, fit for slavery. All right, so these nations, these European Christians, these European proselyte Jews, as well as these Muslims and Moors, knew that the children of Israel was fit for slavery. With the children of Israel going into slavery, went with them their culture, language, and heritage. Looking at the book, Negro Folk Music in Eastern South Carolina, it lets us know that primitive Negro music may be traced to a source in which can be found points of contact with Judaism and a Jewish type of Christianity.
Steal away. I ain't got long to stay here. This song which was composed in slavery when the black folks picked and chopping cotton in the hills of Georgia and Tennessee, and this song they sung, for they'll steal away what they pray to their heavenly Father to free them from honor bondage. So this is a song that they sung. I hope y'all will enjoy it too, because it means something to you. Steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. stay here.
So now we're going to be taking it over to the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, From Nile to the Niger, with the Jews by Joseph J. Williams. Throughout this reading from this book, we will be getting some insight on the Hebrewisms and the Hebraic traits left behind by our ancestors scattered abroad throughout the Americas. Starting at the very top, it reads, "Now, as Gardner observes, even to today, in Jamaica, the descendants of the old slaves retain a practice that the room in which a person dies should not be swept or disturbed for 9 days. Water and other requisites are placed in it, and as among the Jews, a light is kept burning during the prescribed period. Gardner, however, is in error when he positively asserts that this practice is not of African origin. Furthermore, as a matter of fact, Hebrewisms of African derivation are not confined to Jamaica. Among the West Indian islands, Blair Niles, in her recent delightful little volume, Black Haiti, speaking on the slaves from Africa, positively asserts some were said to be descendants of Jews mixed with Negroes. These were tall, well-built men whose features had a Caucasian cast and whose language was clearly Semitic in character." Alright, so what do I always say? We have to chew the meat, spit out the bone, use discernment. Coming from these Caucasians' minds, the Israelites were white, the Israelites were European. Therefore, any Jew you see within America that's black, they have to be mixed with Negroes. But based off scripture and based off historical research, we know that the Israelites were Negroes and their descendants were Negroes and are the Negroes. Just a quick note, but I digress. Continuing, Dr. Price Mars, whom she quotes as an authority, also claims a distant Semitic infiltration in the antecedents of some of the San Domingo slaves. Alright, so even in San Domingo, this Semitic infiltration made its way amongst our ancestors. Moving on to the Virgin Islands, on the doors of the Negro cabins in the country outside the towns, crosses may be seen, much like those the Hebrews made with blood of the Passover lamb. This is to keep out the wolf, says the ancestors. Exodus 12:23. For Yah will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sieved the blood upon the lintel, and on the 2 side posts, Yah will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. Alright, so we see this Hebraic trait, this Hebraic custom all the way from Exodus, making its way amongst the ancestors. Alright, continuing on. It is interesting then to find Sir Harry Johnston inciting the Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair and to have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians, and further noting the Jewish hybrids with the Negro in Jamaica and Guinea reproduce most strikingly the Assyrian type. Alright, so what they're saying here literally is the Negroes in Jamaica and Guinea, alright, reproduce the features of the Jewish Negroes within Assyria. Continuing on. Whatever we may think of this author's claim of the Negro element in the ancient Hebrews, his attitude will make less shocking our present endeavors to show an infiltration of the same Hebrew stock in the involving of certain distinctively Negro tribes in Africa. It is surprising, too, to find a Mississippi Negro attributing to the Jews the custom so prevalent in West Africa as well in Jamaica in the slave days, of putting food and money in the coffin with the dead so that they can eat and buy things when he gets to heaven. Alright, so we see another Hebraic trait all the way in the United States by way of Mississippi. Throughout our years of enslavement throughout the Americas, our ancestors were always able to preserve a distinct identity of who they were deep down. They was always able to preserve the knowledge of their true Elohim. This is why whenever our ancestors got their hands on the Bible, they automatically had a connection. They automatically knew that they were the children of Israel. This is why when we look at certain books like the African American Religious Experience, we see certain stuff that hints to a certain comfort and a certain knowing of their identity. It reads, "In return, the slaves thanked and praised God at every opportunity. Slave worship, as Mary Chestnut noted, echoed with the shouts of hallelujah and praise Jesus. And slaves took comfort in the notion that God would eventually respond to their needs. I tell them, if they keep praying, we marked one slave preacher, the Lord will set them free." Moving on to the book Civil War and Salvation, we see something very similar. And it reads, Daniel L. Fountain challenges the conventional wisdom that Christianity played a central role in the slave community, although Christian core among the enslaved prophesied it, that God would deliver them out of slavery.
So the Lord, he talked to Moses. And he said, if the Pharaoh still wouldn't let the children of Israel leave on their own, then Moses should call for a plague or locust to come and eat every tree, every leaf, every grain in Egypt. And that's just what Moses did. Oh, he stretched forth the hand and he raised his staff and he called for a great east wind, and it blew all night, it blew all morning, and it brought the locust, and the locust covered the face of the land of Egypt. And the land was dark, and the locust ate the trees, it ate the fruit, it ate the cotton, it ate the cane, and it ate every single green living thing in the whole land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh, oh, the Pharaoh, he called for Moses. And he said, Moses, I see how I was wrong in not giving the children of Israel their freedom. And he sure was silent and pleased with Moses forgiving his sin. And Moses, he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord brought forth a powerful west wind, and it blew every single one of them locusts right on down. Oh, yes it did. Yes it did. And then, but the Pharaoh, mean Pharaoh, the Lord, he hardened his heart. And he still wouldn't let the children of Israel go.
Jerome, how old are you?
9.
9. Do you go to school?
Yes.
Where do you go to school, Jerome?
At the Little Children Elementary School.
I see. What is your sister's name?
Lois.
That's Lois. And what are your other sisters' names?
Catherine. and Beulah.
Catherine and Beulah. What happened to your foot, Jerome?
Dig a nail in out there by the wash house.
So you drove a nail in out by the wash house. What did your mother do for that?
Put some alcohol on it
Where do you sleep, Jerome?
in this bed.
You have this big bed?
Yes,
What happened? How did you get that hole in that bed there, Jerome?
the rats.
The what?
Rats.
Now, Jerome, you are taking care of Kathy, of Beulah, and Lois.
Yes,
Now, are you going to give them lunch today?
yes.
What are you going to feed them?
I don't know.
Do you have any food here to give them?
Yes.
I see. What time does your mother come home?
I don't know.
The following day, Aline King, the mother of Jerome, Kathy, Lois, and Beulah, again was picking beans.
Aileen King, I saw your children yesterday at the Okeechobee camp. Why didn't you put them in the nursery?
I don't make enough to pay for it.
How much does it cost to put them in?
85 cents.
85 cents.
That's right.
Aileen, what time did you come out the field this morning?
6 o'clock.
What time will you get home?
About 3:30, 4 o'clock.
6 this morning to 4 o'clock this afternoon.
That's right.
How much did you earn?
$1.
$1?
That's right. $1.
Is that because the beans were of poor quality?
That's right.
Has this happened before?
That's right.
How much will your food cost you today?
About $2.
Aileen, how old are you?
29.
How many children do you have?
14.
How old were you when you first started working in the fields?
8.
You've been working 21 years in the fields?
That's right.
Aileen, do you ever think you'll be able to get out of this kind of work?
No, sir.
Next, we're going to be reviewing the book Black Zion, African American Religious Encounters with Judaism. And we're going to look at some of the identifications of our people with Israel. Starting at the very top, and it reads, several writers have suggested that the ultimate root of Black Judaism lie in the identification of African American slaves with the Egyptian servitude and liberation of the biblical Hebrews. Notes Jones, the religious imagery of African American Christianity is full of references to the suffering and hopes of the oppressed Jews in the biblical times. This natural empathy found its earliest expression in the spiritual music of the slaves. Above all, it was the compelling sense of identification with the children of Israel and the tendency of dwelling incessantly upon and to relieve the stories of the Old Testament that characterized the religious songs of the slaves. As Rabatias concludes, through spiritual music, the slaves' identification with the children of Israel took on an immediacy and intensity which would be difficult to exaggerate. Given their respective day-to-day experiences, songs about Moses and Joshua must have had much more personal and immediate meaning for the African Americans than to his white master. Similarly, folk preachers among the slaves were conversant with biblical stories and used them regularly in their sermons. For example, Zenovici records the case of John Jasper, a popular African American preacher from Virginia, who regularly was asked to give his sermons on Joshua to both slaves and whites. Continuing on, for some slaves, biblical stories offer a political message in addition to the spiritual comfort they provided. Yuya argues that ambitious slaves saw in the Mosaic tradition an invitation to dress themselves in messianic garments and a justification for revolt against their oppressors. Herein lay the potential of Hebraic identity to furnish a messianic nationality response to white oppression. It is noteworthy that slave rebellion leaders like Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, and Nat Turner all took inspiration from the Bible. We know one of the main reasons We see this connection throughout our history, and this understanding and this remembrance is based off Baruch chapter 2 and verse 30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivities they shall remember me. Alright, the Most High knew that it was going to take for him to scatter us amongst heathen nations for us to remember ourselves. Continuing on. The black faith of Nat Turner posed a crucial problem for slave culture. If Moses was a deliverer of the Israelites from the slaveholders in Egypt, could not a black Messiah lead his people from bondage into a new Canaan land? The exact route of transition from metaphoric or political coded uses of Old Testament figures, place names, and events to express the harsh conditions experienced by the slaves and their hope for liberation to an actual adoption of Hebraic identity and alleged kinship is historically unclear. Bratz, for one, maintains as early as the 1900s, Negro preachers were traveling through the Carolinas preaching the doctrine that the so-called Negroes were really the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There is no reason to think, however, that such reflections did not begin much earlier. In fact, within slavery itself, when the more imaginative and daring of the slaves began to wonder about the very human questions of who they really were and where they really came from. African American history tells us something similar. Younger, more formally educated pastors of African American Protestant congregations and denominations such as Methodist, Presbyterian, and Baptist had been influenced by both biblical analogies and current events of the 1960s. Since these pastors preached sermons comparing the plight of African Americans to the Israelites, stressing that African Americans in the United States were a separate nation that had been conquered by the larger surrounding white nation. They called for obedience to a God who was on the side of the oppressed people, and Jesus, who was dark-skinned and non-European, and for our identification with the nation of African Americans.
The Lord shall bring thee and thy king which thou shalt set over thee unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known.
So we see throughout the early times of our people coming out of slavery and going up through the 90s, it was preached throughout the churches who we truly were. And an example of a church who preached and knew who we were is the First African Baptist Church of Savannah, Georgia.
This is First African Baptist Church, the oldest black church in North America. The building built by slaves. The gentleman that laid the first brick laid the last. The balcony hold pews that actually were built by slaves. They have the oldest information in this building. That information is written in cursive Hebrew writing. Cursive Hebrew writing. Cursive Hebrew writing.
The book, History of the First African Baptist Church, informs us that even the pastors were called Israel. And it reads, I came to church expecting to hear a wreck of a preacher, a Negro preacher. I found in the pulpit a master in Israel. Age had not touched his faculties. His mind is vivacious, and his workings are as true and faithful as are the intellects of men of 30 or 40 years of age. This noble preacher had more points of power in that hour than I have heard in any sermon for 5 years. I regard him as the most astonishing preacher I have ever listened to. When his age, his social position, and his illiteracy are all considered, no pulpit in New York or Boston but would have been honored by such a sermon. And this master in Israel was also known as Reverend Andrew C. Marshall.
This is the information that they want to blot out. This is the information that they don't want us to know about. It's a lot of history here that many of us have no clue, you know, about the Underground Railroad being here. And we're going to go downstairs and I'm going to show you a little bit of that. But I wanted to show you again. These are the pews right here. These are the pews. These are the pews. Look at the writing. Look at the ancient writings. These are writings from our ancestors back in the 1700s, the 1800s. You know, how is it that our ancestors back in 1773 was writing in the Hebraic language?
To find more on the church and its pews, we can jump to an article made by Going on Faith as they interview one of the descendants of these church members. It reads, "During the time, it was extremely secretive that it was a safe house. The only way to know it was a stop if you had a friend or a family member who told you about it," said Erica Wade, Director of Tourism at First African Baptist Church of Savannah. And though the 4-foot-tall crawl space used to hide the slaves beneath the church is still intact today, the original entrance to the space still remains unknown. The church also bears literal scars of the horror of slavery. Slaves constructed the church pews. At the ends of each of them, there is an engraved cursive writing that is believed to be a dialect known as cursive Hebrew that slaves brought with them to the New World from Africa. Slaves constructed the church pews, and at the ends of each of them there is engraved cursive writing that is believed to be a dialect known as cursive Hebrew that slaves brought with them to the New World from Africa. Now let me ask you this. Were we taught throughout our years of school that our ancestors wrote in Hebrew?
It is not uncommon to see the Zion used interchangeably with the Sin. Let's go to the next syllable, which is pronounced Ray. Lastly, let's add the last syllable, Il. Altogether, they are pronounced Yiz, Ray, Il, or Is, Ray, Il, Is, Ray, Il, Is, Ray, Il.
So clap your hands. Like this. Come on. Come on now. Clap your hands. Nigga run, nigga flew, nigga tore his shirt in two. Run, run, the paddy roller get you. Run, nigga, run, well, you better get away. That's right, like you mean it. Nigga run, run so fast, over his head in a hornet's nest. Run, run, the paddy roller get you. Run, nigga, run, well, you better get away.
Although Israel was emancipated out of bondage after countless years of prayers, we see that the curses of Deuteronomy continued to cleave onto the descendants of Israel as outlined. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 37 informs us that thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Since our emancipation up until now, we can see how all three of these actions have taken hold in us.
Have erupted in the US state of Georgia after a black man was shot dead by police in the capital, Atlanta.
Air Force is deployed. Get out of the car! Get out of the car now!
up. That's
Car now! Sir, just get out of the car!
I'm trying to breathe.
Get out of the car now!
That's up. That's really up.
Yeah, get out of the car and get on the ground now. You're gonna get it again.
I don't even want to reach my seatbelt. Can you
take your seatbelt off?
In New York City alone, okay, blacks are 23%. They make up 75% of the population. 75% of all shootings, 70% of all robberies, and 60% of all violent crime. All right, the whites only 3%. Now, that is why there were more blacks in jail than there are whites. But that's okay. And now let me just finish here, and then all right. So we look at that statistic. All right, they turn it around. You know, the racial demagogues out there turn it around that the blacks are being picked on.
Guys, how are you still on national TV and said that black people are prone to criminality? I wouldn't able to respond to that. Okay.
Well, they are.
But you think black people are prone to criminality?
The statistics here show it.
You don't mean to say that. I'm gonna give you a chance to correct me. You don't mean that black people are prone to criminality.
What does this say?
I don't know what that says, but I know
the chief can back me up because he's coming out.
He's not gonna stay on national TV and say black people are prone to criminality.
I am telling you, 75% of all shootings are black.
I'm hoping you just don't know.
75% of shootings. What you're doing is something else. I'm saying.
Harry,
your narrative. That's what you do.
I'm just Harry, Mark.
We become proverbs when the U.S. Constitution tells us that we are nothing more than 3/5 of a human being. We become an astonishment when throughout our years on this foreign land, we see generation throughout generation the same atrocities happening to our people, such as us being murdered, hung from trees, and being brutalized by the law enforcement. The nations have even taken crafty counsel to give us different bywords to express ourselves, such as nigger or Negro or Black American or African American. This was all to hide our true identity. But when looking into that word nigger or niger, we can dig up into our history. When looking at the scripture, Acts chapter 13 verses 1, it says, "Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger," or rather nigger. All right, the same thing we African Americans are called within the U.S. But what does that have to do with us? According to Fawcett's Bible Dictionary, Niger or nigger is the surname of Simeon, which means black. According to them, he was a African proselyte because he is associated with Lucius or Cyrene in Africa. His Hebrew name, Simeon, shows his Hebrew extraction. Now, according to the European masses, Simeon was surnamed Niger because he was black. What we are really going to find out is that Simeon was called Niger or nigger because he was from the Niger River, the same place you and your ancestors were picked up from. Yes, yes, yes. The Niger River, within the confines of Western Africa, has a long, long Hebrew history. Looking at the book, the modern part of an universal history from the earliest accounts of time informs us on the Niger River. It says, there are some who call themselves original Jews of the prosperity of Abraham, who pretend to have formerly come in colonies and to have settled themselves in Egypt, Abyssinia, and along the Niger or Niger. And these last are more numerous and considerable than the last two, meaning the Jews at the Niger River was more numerous and considerable than the Jews within Egypt and Abyssinia. Continuing on. But those who came and are here still in the great number are such as refugees themselves in these parts, either after the destruction of Jerusalem and the dispersion of the Jewish nation by Titus Vespasian, mentioned in a former chapter, or who fled from other persecutions under the Romans, Persians, Sartians, and since under the Christians, as out of Italy about 1342, Spain and Portugal about 1462, and out of the Low Countries about 1350, France 1403, and England 1422. All these go differently habited as well as divided amongst themselves. They distinguish themselves by their several nations and tribes. All right. So within the confines of this Niger River area, you have multiple waves, multiple migrations of Israelites coming out of Jerusalem during different events and sieges, as well as the Black Jews coming out of the European countries after being expelled and banished. But why is this important? And how does this apply to us Black Americans today? The thing about the Niger River is during the years when the slave trade flourished, nearly half the total numbers of slaves exported from Africa came from the Niger Delta, which came to be known as the Slave Coast. This is why your ancestors came over to the United States, praising and shouting the name Yah. This is why your ancestors sung songs like Kumbaya, Go Down Moses, etc. This is why Hebrew writing is within the First African Baptist Church. This is why our ancestors still practice Hebrew customs within slavery, because they are indeed Israelites from the Niger. This is why you are referred to as niggers. When looking at Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 29, it states that Israel shall not prosper in thy ways, and that thou shalt be oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save you. So according to the scriptures, Israel shall be only oppressed. When we look in Israel in the United States today, they are educationally oppressed, systematically oppressed, overall oppressed. This is why we see our people in the slums, at the bottom, and at the tail of the United States society. Now, with this next source we're about to read, we're going to take a quick pit stop all the way over to Israel to make a connection to us over here in America. And the source we're going to be reading from is called The Other. It says, The black Jews, or Sephardi's, are termed Franks, a term comparable in Israel to nigger. They are considered fit only for second-rate occupations. Continuing down, even so, there have been isolated spots of violence. The black Jews tend to congregate in ghettos and villages of their own. Two things to take from this. The Jews within Israel were also referred to as niggers, as well as them also dwelling within ghettos. Important word about that phrase ghetto is that it has always been known to house Jews or be a place where Jews reside. Now, with that in mind, we're going to jump over to European Journal of Sociology. It reads, who then are these black Hebrews whose existence was only brought to our attention between 1960 and 1965? They come from the Black American world and are mainly to be found in the ghettos. Did not the Most High tell us we shall be oppressed only? Was not the Israelites within Israel dwelling in ghettos? So what should we expect the Israelites to be dwelling in their other scattered lands? The ghettos. Let me read this again. They come from the Black American world and are mainly to be found in the ghettos, where they claim to be the true believers in the law of Moses and the descendants of those who concluded the alliance with Yahweh, that is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And remember the source we read about the Israelites on the Niger River, because they boasted that they were sons of Abraham, just as the black Jews within America, boasting that what? They are the true believers of the laws of Moses and the descendants of those who concluded the alliance with Yahweh, that is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These Black American Hebrews are scattered throughout the big cities of the East and the Center, like New York and Chicago. Taking a look back at the scriptures, Zephaniah 3 and 10, I find it very interesting that where the Most High said his people shall be dispersed, it's the same place we were taken from, and you will find our people living to this day. And it reads, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughters of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. When looking at an ancient map of Ethiopia, it is easy to see that the Most High was saying that the Israelites will be scattered throughout sub-Saharan Africa, knowing that ancient Ethiopia took up a way larger landmass, and it is not modern day Ethiopia. Another thing to take a look at is how from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, we were taken captive beyond the Ethiopian Ocean. Now, is that a coincidence? Isaiah chapter 18, verses 1. It reads, woe to the land shadowed with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea. That sendeth ambassadors by the sea. even in vessels of bulrushes upon the water. All right, saying, go ye, swift messengers, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning, hereto a nation meted out and trodden down, whose lands the rivers have spoiled. So we see in Zephaniah 3:10, Israel will be scattered beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And here in Isaiah 18 verses 1 through 2, we see that ambassadors were sent by sea in vessels upon the water, saying, go ye swift messengers to a nation scattered and peeled. So with that background knowledge, let's take it over to the book, How the Hebrews Became Jews. It tells us the Hebrews of North, East, and West Africa, particularly Ethiopia, are Phalashim. They settled from Morocco to Angola. They settled from Morocco to Angola, taking it down to the bottom where it reads, Windsor states, as you recall, in the year 1484, King John of Portugal deported great numbers of black Jews to the African island of Saint Tomé near Nigeria and the Cameroon. So here again, we can prove historically that the Israelites were scattered beyond the rivers of Ethiopia from Morocco to Angola, and we can prove biblically that the Israelites would be scattered beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. This is why we look at the book like This Far by Faith. We see it mentioning that during slavery, Africans saw themselves as literally the Hebrews of the Old Testament. During slavery, Africans saw themselves as literally the Hebrews of the Old Testament. By now, you should have the understanding that our Hebrew heritage is not a game. Biblically, we have the understanding. Historically, we have the understanding. Orally, we have the understanding. We are who our fathers are. Rudolph R. Windsor, within the book From Babylon to Timbuktu, says it best. Like the black Jews in America, some of the Jews in Guinea don't remember their original nationality. This deplorable ignorance is attributed to various causes. 1. The fall of the Hebrew kingdoms. 2. The lack of communication with Jewish educational centers. 3. Intense persecution, i.e. the transatlantic slave wars, and the deliberate blotting out of the mind their true nationality. And deliberate blotting out of the mind of their true nationality. This is the things they did to us within the confines of America. They didn't give us our true history. They didn't give us our true nationality. Rather, just giving us the name African American. In the book Ezekiel, chapter 5, verses 14, the Most High placed a curse on us during this time. And we see this taking a hold of us to this very day. It says, "Moreover, I will make thee waste and a reproach among the nations that are round about thee, in the sight of all that pass by." Therefore, we see the Most High making us a waste and a reproach by taking away our identity and stripping away our nationality because of the sins of our forefathers. Remember, the Most High deals with us as a nation, generation through generation. We are the covenant people. And with that, I say thank you for tuning in today. Todah, Todah. Thank you for all my brothers and sisters today for always tuning in and supporting the channel. May Yah continue to bless us all. May Yah continue to be with us all. May Yah continue to work with us all. Continue to tune in to the channel as we continue to bring out the history of our people that we have been neglected to receive over the last couple hundreds of years. Shalom, Israel.